if we can. Kind of once we go through an initial round of comments, we'll open it up to public discussion and discourse with, and please share your views or perspectives and raise your hand. You'll shout out. I'll try to call on you. We also have some folks online. We want to try to get to them as well. We want to get as much input as we possibly can. So kind of just to reset where we are right now. It was just over 6 months ago where the town council first considered the Planning Commission's recommendation, which was unanimously sent to the council to establish the beach overlay district. That was back in October of 14th. So over 6 months ago that we actually had first reading. And the intention of first reading was to move the ball forward and then to continue to get public input. I think John will go through this. We've had various Planning Commission members subsequent to that time. We've had public workshops. And then just earlier this month on the 7th, we had calendared another public hearing as well as consideration of the beach overlay district on the second reading. That ended up being deferred because as the administration and staff looked at some of the recommendations of the Planning Commission and based upon input we'd gotten from the community and discussions with our council, we came to the conclusion that there were some legitimate issues that needed to be addressed. I want to make clear from at least my perspective, fellow council members can speak for themselves, that didn't go to the merits of the beach overlay district as a whole, but really to provide some additional certainty and clarity regarding the application of the beach overlay district, and particularly comparing, contrasting with the existing zoning code. And most of that revolved around issues related to the application of kind of non-conforming structures as defined under the beach overlay and how that intersected with section 1292 of our zoning code. So there were some legitimate questions that we think need to be cleaned up, and we've been working on those. There were also issues raised about the administrative waiver language in the process, and that we acknowledged at the last council meeting that needed to be addressed. So there's a couple of other things we've continued to kind of work on. We've continued to have interaction. We've received input from community members. We've had interaction with KICA subsequent to our April 7th meeting. So this is a continuation of the process. Now, the expectation has been that this will still be on the council's agenda for the next council meeting early in May for second reading. However, I would say that at this juncture is not certain, in large part because kind of from a statutory perspective, the changes that we're contemplating are of a material nature, which would mean they would need to go back to the Planning Commission for recommendation or input. Now, I think the Planning Commission and the chair, Joanne Hennessy, can speak to this, had tentatively scheduled a special call meeting for next week to take that up. Whether or not I think we have all our ducks T's crossed and I's dotted, given the ongoing discussion with a number of stakeholders, that remains to be seen whether that will take place. But again, we still want to get input from you. We'd specifically invited the last council meeting, Mr. O'Kelly, to offer on behalf of his several clients any specific changes that he would want to recommend. And as I indicated, we've also worked with KICA board members, particularly KICA board member Tim Hazel, who practices in this area and has had some thoughtful suggestions as well, and we're trying to onboard that. So that's kind of where we are procedurally and a little bit substantively right now. So with that, before I turn it over to John, just if any my fellow council members and then Planning Commission members want to offer any initial thoughts.
But sure, just very quickly, I am very happy to see so many people here. We are listening. And I want to encourage you to talk. Please don't be shy or bashful. In order for us to listen, you guys need to communicate. So please, please talk as much as you can today. That's the only thing I want to say.
Very similar to what Mayor Pro Tem said. Before I ran for council, many of you remember I spoke at planning commission meetings and council meetings often about concerns I had as well. So I understand what it's like to have concerns and share by being here to express them so we can best understand them. Nothing.
Yes, thank you all for coming. We have already listened to a lot of the input that you've given us in the past, whether by letter or by attendance at the last meeting. Worked very closely with Tim Hazel to try to flesh out some of the legal issues. Right away, you guys questioned jurisdictional setback lines. We looked at that as quickly as we could in order to determine where the state is in moving those. So John had, Mr. Taylor had already been in contact with the state to see what kind of progress they were making, where lines had been moved. There's a lot of work that's been done down at the southern end of the state. Some lines have been moved inward. Most lines at this stage were consistent with where they are now. So we saw very, very little change, but frankly, I don't think I would have gone and looked at that if you guys hadn't raised that issue. So we really do want to hear your input and great suggestions, and it gives us a starting point for all an additional homework. Thank you.
Madam Chair or any commission
No,
members?
I just want to emphasize, you see the dates on there where we started talking in March of 25. Our discussions actually started pretty much a year before that. This is something that has been a long time coming. Our goal is to protect our island, protect our environment, our habitat, maritime forest, and prevent incursion from water and keep our vegetation. We view this as a very important step in conservation, and I'm very happy to see all the conservancy people here today. I hope you all will speak out as well. And Ms. Smershel has been closest to working on the details. Thank you for all your work on this.
No, I'm just here to listen. Thanks.
Thank you for being here.
Okay. John, why don't you did a little bit of this at the last council meeting, maybe a more abbreviated version of that and with a little bit more context on kind of the 2, 3, 4 issues we've been looking at a little bit closely since the council meeting.
Yes, thank you. I echo thank you for all being here today from staff's perspective and being able to gauge further along with this proposed beach overlay. And so I think beginning, I wanted us to really circle on the purpose and intent. This was highlighted at our last public hearing and workshop or town council meeting rather. The thing that I want to echo from staff's perspective is it's multi-purpose, multifaceted. It's not just one thing that we're trying to solve for here with this proposed beach overlay. And so you'll see that in amongst of protecting the integrity and its natural function, the beach serve as our primary defense from a resilience standpoint. But we also want to be able to make sure that we're preserving that natural resources from a coastal perspective. The aesthetic value and character is something that is treasured here on Kiowa. Many of why those who live and decide to recreate here on Kiowa has chosen Kiowa. And so within our comprehensive plan, the town adopted November of last year. Living with nature is this idea that we have matured, if you will, as a community, and we want to make sure moving forward that continues to be in the forefront, the character of Kiowa. Continuing our wildlife habitat, being able to preserve the wildlife habitat in this ecosystem, that includes the maritime forest, the ocean front, the beachfront, serves many different flora and fauna. And this particular initiative, this proposed beachfront overlay, directly wants to be able to ensure that those animals, plant life, are maintained and sustained in the coastal environment that they dwell in. We know that there are a number of changing coastal conditions. Storms are happening more frequent. Storms are happening at a scale of where we are able to predict and in some instances not predict. The 2023 nor'easter was one that caught necessarily everyone by surprise, but it was one that was shared with us, and we learned a lot from that particular unnamed storm. So those coastal change of conditions, we want to be able to respond accordingly. And this is development practices and these types of beachfront overlay zoning districts is the purpose in being able to do that. Then the other two there is just environmental stewardship. Councilmember Kay, I can always hear that from her. It's just that Kiwa is a leader in environmental stewardship. And so I don't think that anything that we would propose or that anything that has been proposed sets us as following the rhythm, but we're setting the tone for other communities. And so we want to always promote that environmental stewardship. And finally, from a resilience standpoint, erosion and flooding, that's been already shared, kind of the echoes beginning of conversations today. But the beachfront, without it, Kiwa would be in trouble. So I won't dwell too much into these next few slides. This is just showing that our proposed beachfront overlay is consistent with the comprehensive plan. And that's one thing that drives the decision-making for the town and town council members. We want to be able to prioritize the unique connection between Kiwa and its nature. And so that includes being able to protect and preserve the natural resources, that priority being the beachfront. Even continuing that, which has already been highlighted, all of these are examples quoted directly from our comprehensive plan. Planning Commission worked really hard to get this in front of council, and council supported it in its adoption. And you see that everything is consistent with this particular plan as being proposed. The one thing that I'll highlight is there's direct action out of the comprehensive plan that addresses this actual proposal, beachfront overlay. You see at the bottom there in the third bullet, the town should incorporate native vegetation and buffers into its land development regulations. So the recommendation that's to date, that's a direct action step that the Planning Commission is really taking seriously from what's in a plan. Oftentimes we hear a plan just sits on a shelf. That's not the case here. We're actually moving forward with recommendations that were outlined in the plan. So I'll continue and jump ahead and just giving some dynamics regarding the beachfront. One of the questions raised, well, how does this apply and why? What particular standards are in place that does not address the concerns that this proposed beachfront overlay is trying to address? And so our base zoning is a number of parcels, number of different zoning districts. You can see the numbers there regarding the difference between single family, multifamily, resort parcels, our parks and recreation parcels, 8 to 10 miles of beachfront. All of these different properties have different development standards. And so with this proposed beachfront overlay, it's creating some consistency on the ocean front. That's part of purpose there, wanting to not look at any one particular part of the island's ocean front over the other, but the entire ocean front. How can we look at it collectively from the different varying development standards that are in place today? That includes different varied heights, setbacks, etc. Even lot coverage. Similarly, we know just the vast majority of the homes are single family residential, but we've seen development patterns where those homes are becoming larger and closer to the ocean. Is that something that the town should be looking at, right? Building closer to the ocean, but we know the impacts of sea level rise and the environmental risks that are involved there. As stated, these are continued factors regarding our ocean front. I mentioned the varied setbacks and zoning districts. I also want to mention that some of the parcels actually go down to the mean high water line. So that's a different rhythm than majority of the parcels on Kiwa, where we have a natural, the Kiwa Island Community Association's parcel that was conveyed, sort of a natural park-like setting in front of most of the ocean front parcels. That's not the case for all of them. So without this proposed beach overlay, and without some of the setbacks in place that are being buffer zones that are being proposed, we could potentially see a different type of development pattern on Kiwa because of those parcels extending further to the mean high water line. You see that on the west end in the central core of the island.
John, maybe just press pause there for a moment, because this is an area that I think I found very compelling as I've learned more about the evolution of zoning standards on Kiawah Island, or in many respects, the lack of evolution of zoning standards on Kiawah Island, which is unique in contrast to most other coastal communities. Putting aside the Kiowa general covenants, which as a whole, and they apply to most properties, but not all, have been a pretty effective tool for consistent management of development across the island. That hasn't been the case with the town of Kiowa Island's zoning regulations. And it's again, I've learned a lot of this over just the last few months, much to my chagrin. Our zoning code was completely onboarded from Charleston County. The issue is Charleston County itself doesn't have any beachfront property. All the beachfront property is municipalities. We simply had no set of consistent standards relative to beachfront, waterfront, marshfront here on the town of Kiawah Island, in the town of Kiawah Island zoning standards. Again, it was largely driven by the general covenants more so than zoning standards. And when I started digging in this a little more to learn that there were 7 different zoning districts across the oceanfront, setbacks ranging from 20 to 120 feet with no particular rhyme or reason, side setbacks varying. Also learning that we have base zoning standards for our different zoning districts, but in many cases, those aren't applicable because John has a book. What is the graphical standards book, where almost every parcel on Kiawah Island has its own unique setbacks. And we then learned that as development and redevelopment started occurring, new development, particularly along the ocean front, that's really revealed the inadequacy of the existing set of zoning standards to be able to address some of these issues that were raised by the Planning Commission in the context of Kiawah Next, to be able to protect our natural buffers, to be able to protect maritime forest, wildlife habitat, et cetera. And so that's what this process over now really close to the last 2 years has revealed. I'm appreciative of the fact that because you have so many different zoning districts, so many different setbacks under current law, that if you try to provide some consistency across the beachfront, that has the potential for disparate impacts on different property owners. And so we're trying to be extraordinarily mindful of that to be able to best achieve the intended broader community objectives while minimizing any adverse impacts on individual property owners. Zoning is inherently involves a set of trade-offs. Any zoning is an alienation on property rights. Right now, you can't build your house above 40 feet. That's a zoning restriction. We do have setbacks. Those are zoning restrictions. This is an attempt to provide an additional overlay on the inconsistent base zoning in order to, as John said, provide some consistency in how we develop undeveloped parcels and redevelop existing developed parcels across the oceanfront over the rest of Kiawah's history.
Thank you, Mayor. I think presented at the last town council meeting, a lot more of the key factors. What I'm thinking about is jumping ahead because I do want to make sure that we get enough time for the community to share. So I'll jump ahead. So I think some of the imagery that was shown to just show you the considerations of why this is being proposed. So this is just the varying depths of density and dunes in the natural vegetation. And you'll see these are 3 different sections of the ocean front. You can see the depths there. And the next few images are just imagery over time. Just is to just notice the property lines there and the vegetation adjacent to those property lines. Just maybe focus on a few properties itself or just the property line, you'll begin to see the change in dune field and vegetation over time. Here's another different section here. You can see it grows a little bit, but then this is again, so the amount of vegetation has been lost, whether it be natural or man-made, it's the things that we're trying to solve for with this proposal. So now we'll get to, I think, before we open it up, I do wanted to share a few notes. I think Ms. Kay shared one of the questions that did come up regarding the 2018 jurisdictional lines in the state's process. Where the state is right now, and they're going through a survey process, the entire state for the jurisdictional lines. And so, although Kiowa specifically, we're in phase 2, just wanted to let you know the timeline for that. We won't probably see those lines finalized until sometime in 2027, maybe even into 2028, just by the near factor of the process. And so here's directly from a few graphics directly from the state site of understanding the additional public hearing processes that are incorporated into it. You all recall or are familiar with the 2018 lines in that cycle. Those lines were produced and there were challenges to the particular spots of those lines. So that adds an additional factor of where the state has to sort of reconcile with any challenges of where the proposed line is. So right now they're wrapping up phase 1 wrapping up is a loose term, but wrapping up phase 1 and entering into phase 2, hopefully by midsummer, we'll have an update on where we are as far as proposed lines. And I would encourage folks to go and look on the website today, and you can see phase 1 lines of where those are being proposed. That's further south, Hilton Head, Harbor Island, down Rip Islands.
And important to note that down by Hilton Head and stuff, the lines haven't really moved.
Yeah, that's a good point. Majority of the lines have not moved. And when we looked at kind of analyzing phase 1, majority of those lines have not moved. One thing that I'll add here is that pursuant to the state statute in 2016 established that essentially these lines won't move seaward. So looking forward, that's an opportunity for us to discuss any particular mechanisms or matters around what happens and utilizing the 2026 lines opposed to the 2018 lines.
So just on that point, just to say that a different way. Looked at this, 2018 was more forgiving because again, either the jurisdictional line in the southern part of the state had not moved or it had moved landward. So if it moves landward, that's negative for all of us, right? So to the extent that it stays where it is, that's a good thing. So we want to use the 2018 because that's already established. We know where it is. We can move forward and there's not a risk of it moving further into the forest. Well, the line might move, but the way we've established this, it'll be consistent with where it is today or 2018. So again, the line that's established in the southern half of the state, it's either where it is or it's eroded more, moved more. That's not in anybody's interest.
There was a couple questions. I won't dwell on this hard because I think this has been kind of addressed, but why a beach overlay zone? This is a tool that is used commonly in coastal communities for specific interest, for a specific geographic location or area. It allows the ability for municipalities to either further restrict or relax based on standards. And so this is a common planning tool that's inbounds for appeal. We actually already have one with our residential 2 overlay zone district. So now I'm gonna get into the actual ordinance structure, and I think if you may, we can pause here or right now.
Well, yeah, and I think we've gone over this. Let's focus so that we can, John, on the 2 or 3 different issues that we're really looking at tweaking revising the language, maybe more than tweaking in order to address some of the issues that have been arisen.
So let's just start with, I think, might be the largest one that we've heard, which is regarding non-conforming structures. And I think I'll start with just the intent, and planning commissioners feel free to weigh in, but the intent is that, a direction at least, was the ability for property owners to not necessarily, the impacts of this ordinance will not require you to tear up anything today. Allow you to rebuild pursuant to there's a casualty of nature, a natural force, a storm to be able to rebuild. The second part of that is expanding that particular nonconformity. So I know there's questions of whether or not the direction of this proposed ordinance, whether it should or should not include the ability for a property owner to expand an existing nonconforming structure. Staff's perspective is that we believe that you should be able to still maintain your existing footprint, but you should not be able to expand that nonconformity should you be coming to renovate or do modifications to that structure. We've not necessarily modified the ordinance yet, but we've been listening and we've heard those comments. And I think that's the direction that I'm hearing from staff's perspective that's comfortable with members of the commission, members of town council. But that's something that we want to hear from you today is regarding repairs, renovations, and restoration. Of looking at the second bullet point, this comes out of directly sort of a portion of our existing section 12-192, slightly modified, but repairs, renovation, and restoration would be able to be made to non-conforming structures so as that non-conformity is not extended, enlarged, or increased. So that gives you the ability to maintain your existing structures today. However, and that would include the ability for you to do full gut without having any penalty, for lack of better words, of as long as you're not increasing the nonconformity. That's the piece that I think is, from staff's perspective, is what we must continue to keep within the proposed ordinance. We want you to have the ability to do repairs, modifications, etc. But expanding the nonconformity structure is something in that, from a planning perspective, nonconforming structures, we want to be able to eventually transition those to become compliant with our regular regulatory tools.
If I could butt in for a second, between the last planning, between the last town council meeting and today, I pulled all of the site plans that I could. There are many that are in the archive that I couldn't pull yet, and we're working towards getting those out. It sounds like an exaggeration, but not. But the primary lot coverage for homes is limited to 33%. That's the rule right now today. Right now today, you're limited to 33%. Of all the site plans I was able to pull, the lowest percentage lot coverage is 32.2%. Pretty much everybody else is 32.9. Which means right now today, you cannot expand your home. I just wanted to get that point out there. As of right now today, you cannot expand the lot coverage because you're already at the max.
Can I also make a comment, and Darabelle or Mr. Taylor, you may want to follow my comment. Yesterday, 4 applications met the Board of Zoning Appeals. And while it's unusual for all 4 to get approved, 4 were approved yesterday. And there's criteria that's established, and the board felt that the applications met the criteria, but there were changes to the structure, they were minor, but they did add square footage for form and function and things like that, that were within the criteria of a variance. Now, I'm not saying variances are just going to happen, but there are ways that it does.
If I could just qualify a couple of things, John, you may be getting to this. First, on the variance issue, one of the things we've been looking at is whether there is a construct that provides for some form of administrative relief, and rather than discretionary, if there's a finding that certain conditions are met, then administrative relief would be granted, so that you're not necessarily in the variance world. Because if you go down the variance path, it's a fairly high set of standards. So whether it's characterized as a special exception or not, that's something we're continuing to work through. I think I saw that Tim Hazel was online. That's something we've had a fair amount of back and forth with. That's one of the things we're trying to work through. But one thing I want to emphasize, and John, maybe this is what you were getting to, is there were legitimate questions about the intent here and how that intent interacted with the language of our existing non-conforming statute, and particularly this 50% test. And we're trying to accommodate individual property interest as much as possible, and still trying to abide by the broader set of community interest. John noted that the general kind of construct of zoning standards is if you have non-conforming uses or non-conforming structures, that you want those to conform over time. You want people building back from the ocean further because of all the reasons we're aware of: intense storms, sea level rise, loss of habitat, etc. And generally, the rule in most jurisdictions is if you're doing a substantial remodel apart from complete tear down, then that's going to trigger your requirement to comply fully with the existing code. What John is outlining here that we're working through is not that. It's more favorable to current homeowners that would allow them to do whatever remodeling and not worry about the 50% test. The limitation would still be if you're in zone A or zone B, no enlargement or expansion of the existing footprint. As Councilmember Berner noted, as a practical matter, a lot of homes already, in fact, probably the majority of homes on Kiowa are already at their maximum lot limit, cannot expand anyway without obtaining a variance. And that would be probably a hard road to hoe. So the beach overlay, the application beach overlay district doesn't have any impact on all of those properties. That is something that will exist with the existing code. So, but that may have been where you were going.
Right.
And you're allowed to renovate. It's
Yes,
important. That's
yeah,
an
yeah.
important thing.
That you're
You're
allowed-
allowed to renovate.
Yeah.
And that there is existing base zoning, and we haven't talked about that in a lot of our workshops. Regardless of the beach overlay, if you're in the R1 district, you're subject to R1 base zoning, which is the 33% lot coverage. And what it means, had this beach overlay been in effect 10 years ago, the size of the houses that exist in some of the areas that are being contested could still exist. They just would have been built farther back on their lot because a lot of those lots are deep. So we're not preventing it. We don't want to prevent anyone from building a house. That everybody can build a house, renovate a house. We're not trying to preclude anyone from having their property rights. We were very careful about that in the plan.
The one thing I want to just insert here at this time while we're talking about non-conformance, not to complicate this anyway more. I do think there were a few comments. I just want to make sure that it's clear. Bruce Spiker, our building official, is also here. This particular zoning matter regarding non-conformance is separate and apart from any requirements that are associated with building and FEMA regulations. And so if there's questions regarding of how this particular ordinance being proposed or impacts your requirements for FEMA and flood elevation, I just want you guys to know that's totally separate from this proposed ordinance. So if there was specific questions.
That's a good point. And again, that is a matter of current law that would not be impacted by the beach overlay district. There is a 50% test for FEMA regulations and compliance with the building code. That isn't impacted by the beach overlay, regardless of whether or not we impose this beach overlay district. That would still be the case. FEMA regulations and the building code requires that if there is a more than 50% value of the property is redone, you have to comply with the current building code and floodplain regulations. That's separate from the zoning code.
So, Mr. Mayor, this was a big issue for the public.
Yeah.
from a process standpoint, do we want to stop and take questions on this specific, the non-conforming part of this? Would that make sense?
We certainly can. There's just a couple of other little issues we've been trying to work through, the administrative stuff, but we can get into that as well. I certainly want to open it up, but I want to, if he wants to avail himself of it, provide the initial forum to Mr. O'Kelly.
Well, thank y'all very much for doing this. I can't help myself but stand when I talk. It's because it's what I do. The question becomes, well, what is the new language state? And I know you said you're still working on it. So that the devil is always in the details. So what does the language state? We've got in here that says, provided the replaced structure meets all applicable building code requirements. How are we going to mesh those together so that it's not an issue that someone's house, God forbid, there's a big storm and they're rebuilding? Oh, sorry, your house was built in, there's so few left on the island, 1960 something. You now have to bring it up to building code and you're now in zone B. So does that count as part of the building code or part of the zoning code? You see what I'm saying? It's just.
And the easy answer to that is you're always going to have to comply with theme in the building code.
Always.
Absolutely. My question is, what is the language of the proposed overlay going to say in terms of non-conforming structures? Because I haven't seen new language yet.
It's basically going to say.
No, sir, not basically. What does it actually say?
That is it. The question we are trying to solve for whether you simply say, notwithstanding, 12-192, this is the language, or whether we will tie into 192 and specify for purposes of building the beach overlay district, there are separate rules. That's
Sure. Well, the reason I was asking is because you said earlier we might have to punt again to go back for more language. So again,
it's going to have to go back to the planning commission.
Yes, sir.
Because procedural matter.
and if
This is a
of
subject
course,
change.
my folks are on Eugenia. They are affected disproportionately and differently. As you all have noted, and as we said at the last meeting, and in a perfect world, buffer zone B you would just get rid of it, because if the stated purpose is really protect the dunes and the wildlife, that's protected by A and by state law. Yes, absolutely it is. And we're not going to have this debate. I'm just telling you what, in a perfect world, you would get rid of B, and that would solve the issues for the folks on UG.
What we clearly know, and the record is extraordinarily well developed, that the state jurisdictional lines address certain things, not everything that a community considers to be important. On the west end, east end of the island, the jurisdictional lines are well seaward of the dunes altogether, for example. So they provide zero protection for those dunes.
And on the east end of the island is very different from the folks on Eugenia.
It's all I'm making the point is that jurisdictional lines in and of themselves don't necessarily provide all the protections that are important to the community. As we've noted previously, the state jurisdictional lines are abided by in city of Myrtle Beach. But there are aesthetic considerations and other things that are important to the community as well. And so that's why you have a different set of zoning standards landward of the jurisdiction.
And I don't think anybody wants Kiowa to be Myrtle Beach. In fact, that was said at the council meeting, and I don't think there's a danger of it becoming Myrtle Beach. So I hear you, but I think that's sort of not really relevant to what we're talking about here. Is just talk about what's going on Kiowa. And again, it's the specific language that gives my folks pause, and that's why we're here.
And I appreciate that, and we do need. That's why I said at the outset, I'll defer to Planning Commission and their schedule. It's got to go back to them. We're working as a council administration on trying to come up with the appropriate language, send it back to the Planning Commission for their review and recommendation. That is a work in progress, and you will certainly have commitment from all of us that you will have an ample opportunity to be able to review that.
One of the things I take from where you started and closed is, and some of the people at the table have heard me say this, that when this is put in practice and none of us at the table are at the table anymore, I want to make sure that the language is clear and still accomplishes what we intended to do, and supporting documentation is clear and all that. So we're trying really hard to do that.
No,
I appreciate what you said.
And I appreciate that. And I heard, what you said about, I was kind of surprised when you said all 4 variance requests went through yesterday, because as you know, by
It's not
statute,
the norm.
variances are hard on purpose. And that's by state law and case law. And I mean,
I didn't mean to misrepresent that.
no, sir, but I was shocked that all 4 went through. And so again, one of the things we're concerned about is the administrative aspect of it versus having to go to the BZA and having to say, this is my hardship. A pool is not a hardship. It never has been and never will be. But people apply all the time to get a variance to put in a pool. It's like that. That's not what happens here. So what is the improvements? How will it work with the administrative? So again, just figuring out like.
We hear you on that.
I was just going to say that I think that we've got to recognize that Zone B isn't just dunes, it's also a large part of the maritime forest in many locations along the island. And that is a part of what this is, that is a stated objective of the beach overlay district. And that in addition to it being forest, it's also habitat. And it's also very much the character of the island, and there's not a whole lot of it left. So
Right,
I appreciate, I hear what you're saying.
I don't know that y'all do because it's very different for a very small part of the island. That was the original part of the island. And this is a way to prohibit development like that when the vast majority of the island will never be affected because Kika has a big swath of land that won't be developed. And let me just finish and then I'll listen to you. And the whole part of the island that the Conservancy owns. So this really does disproportionately affect my clients in a way that it will never affect the rest of the island. And go, I'll defer to Mr. Lewis.
My name is Lee Oleski. We're on 63 Eugenia. And I'm not a lawyer. Hamlin is our counsel, along with 22 of my neighbors that have hired him. And I think the biggest issue for us, and maybe you guys have the answer to this, is we can't tell where the line is. So I've looked at all these charts, and some of my neighbors think the line for B is going through their home. Maybe it is. I'm pretty sure it's my whole backyard. We have 200 feet of depth for our property, and 50 feet of those 200 feet are now in Zone B. So you've just taken away. Now, we don't have anything there, nor are we going to build anything there. But if my kids want to sell the property in the future, you've taken away 50 feet of my 200 feet of my property. That's 25%. That's a substantial economic factor for the future value of the property. No one's going to build a bigger house than ours on the property because we've taken up our 33%, whoever said it. And no one's, but.
So nor could a future buyer.
So nor could a future buyer, but you've now made us non-conforming. We've had that house for 20 years. It hasn't been non-conforming. We followed all the rules. We are set back sufficiently. We are not close to the dunes. And yet I can't tell. I've measured it a bunch of times myself, exactly where Zone B runs. And I'm pretty sure for some of my neighbors, Zone B goes through their house. So we have a real lack of information. And I don't know, maybe the town council knows this. Maybe you have this information somewhere. We've got a lot of pictures and slides. I can't tell where that is. And what further worries me is we've got South Carolina is about to change things potentially in a few months. What does that do to everything?
So
They don't know.
It's easy to answer the second question. The South Carolina line will not move in a few months. It won't be a process, as planning director noted, won't be finalized for a couple of years. It is possible that the 2 things will happen to the new jurisdictional line: stay exactly where it is, or it will move landward. As the ordinance is drafted now, whatever happens with the new jurisdictional line will not impact this ordinance one iota because it uses the 2018 jurisdictional line. Now, whether or not that should be the case in the future, or whether we want to reference the 2016 jurisdictional line when it's finalized is one of the things we're trying to assess. And if it were to be moved landward, my expectation is there would be some type of mechanism for correspondingly reducing the buffer, so there would be no more difference than under the new current law. So that, I just want to.
That's great. That's
put
great.
To bed that.
Let's go back to zone B, where the lines actually are.
So you're gonna have to do a survey for any work, and a survey will show you exactly where those lines are, just like they would do right now with the 2018 lines. They would know where those are, and then they would tell you 50 feet and 50 feet, and they would show you exactly where that is.
See, I would think as a matter of good risk management, you've got 40 property owners on the beach who are uncertain. You're gonna require all of them to do the surveys.
You don't have to do anything right now.
Just saying.
You don't have.
You don't have to do anything.
You don't have to do anything. You said already your house is not in buffer zone B, but
I don't
you
know
are.
that.
Okay, let's say, for example, but it doesn't matter unless you're going to do an addition or renovation. But if you're already at your 33%, you can't increase
You would
your,
have to get a survey anyway if you're gonna be doing.
yeah,
that.
any renovation, you have to have a
I'm
survey.
worried about renovation, other than who knows what happens. My house actually burned down. Okay, so the reason we have this change in direction was because I came to the meeting last November and said, my house burned down. It's not clear to me from what you guys have done that I could even rebuild without checking with the town.
I remember you
You
saying
have to
that.
do, you
Okay,
have to
so
do a
I
survey
did say
anyway.
that in November, and to be fair, it looks like things have been adjusted. But I see.
Could even back then, but we're just trying to clarify that that's the case.
Did, and it was perfectly legitimate, but my point was that for all of these homes, if something were to happen with the storm, which is a highly likely probability, everyone's boardwalk gets washed out every few years. If something were to happen, people should be able to rebuild. I don't want to get into that because it looks like that's been addressed. We'll take advice from council, but it looks like that's been addressed. The bigger question I have is, why wouldn't the town, with all the work that's going into this, just have a line and show people where does that zone B go to? So the 40 homeowners aren't worried.
The tool shows you approximately where it is. And you could, if you're starting a remodel process, then you would have to get a survey anyway, both a survey beforehand and as-built survey.
Is this accurate versus precise?
Yeah.
I mean, the line on the tool is accurate
Yes.
It's really hard.
and the survey makes it precise, right?
Yes, that's exactly.
It's really hard to tell. So
Um,
maybe it's my old eyes and I can't see it.
I understand what you're saying. And John, you can smack me in the head if I'm misspeaking, but I mean, you've looked at all the parcels, and if you wanted to sit down with the planning director, I think you're spending enough time on this that would be.
I mean,
an
but
invitation,
there are
right?
no implications immediate. It doesn't, the fact that there is this accurate but not precise line doesn't have any implications for you whatsoever unless you're planning to do remodeling.
Has material impact on the value of all this property. If everyone's in a zone because of where their houses are built, it's gonna be harder to sell property in the future. Because you're gonna have a non-conforming piece of your property that's in zone B.
Mr. Oleski, I mean, there are literally hundreds of
Yeah.
non-conforming structures all around Kiwa Island. It doesn't impact your ability to sell
Yeah.
your property.
My home is non-conforming. I mean, it's just,
Just
I didn't.
what would probably be the best year that we would pull and say that anything built prior to that is very likely non-conforming? Is it 1990? I'm not exactly sure when it is, but
Say 94.
there are a tremendous number of non-conforming
I'm pretty
homes
sure
today.
since I rebuilt my house in 2012 after a fire that devastated the house, that it was conforming in 2012. It is today.
And I think.
So now it's gonna become non-conforming.
It will be legally non-conforming. Legally non-conforming if it was built in conformance with a code at the time it was built. And then it's legally non-conforming and it is subject only to these restrictions.
So that's why 22 of my neighbors have hired counsel. and are considering what action to take because of the risk associated with this change that is being proposed.
I just encourage that, because he confirmed he's willing.
Yeah,
If you're willing to sit down with him, we can look at your property in particular.
To get an agreement on where the line is before something is passed would be hugely helpful to all the homeowners on Eugenia, which is fully 25% of the beach homes on Kiowa.
I'll reecho, the tool that we use is an accurate tool. It's not gonna give you exactly where the line is. That will be determined by a survey.
Within a foot.
But we've used that as our planning tool to be able to really understand the impacts of the proposed overlay. So from a staff perspective, I think it's reliable, but I think the
That's
question
great,
that I'm
but we
hearing
don't
is
know what
more-
the impact is because that hasn't been
Sure,
shared.
the county GIS, you go into county GIS to look at all this stuff, it's not precise either. It's accurate, it's not precise. And it would look like, you go into county GIS, that all sorts of homes are actually being built over property
Lot
lines. They're not, you have to get a survey. At the end of the day, you do work, you have to get a survey. That's where you get precision.
If you agree, and I made this offer at the council
Yeah.
meeting too, before I confirmed with him, but if you take 15 minutes to sit down with him,
That'd
he's
be-
happy to show it to
That would
you.
be great for me personally, but I think there's probably a whole bunch of other homeowners that would want to know
I think it's an open.
where the line is.
But this is a great conversation because it's starting to drill down into at least your concern, but so we have been listening, and I'm still listening today, and we're all listening today. We intentionally have revised the wording that would allow you to renovate completely
Right.
the existing home. So if that is what is allowed today, I want to hear then what's the concern that you
I
have?
think the concern is out of the 200 feet of depth, you're rezoning 50 feet of our property and saying you can't do anything with this 50 feet.
That's
Personally, we're not doing anything with the 50 feet. I don't think my kids are gonna do anything with the 50 feet. It's our backyard. We're not gonna build a structure. But I think that there's a lot of people that might have a different perspective on the street who have recently bought property, have just built a house that's now, limited.
Okay,
So
so
we've had-
let's
you're
take
rezoning
different-
50 feet of
let's
our
take-
property.
So let's take two variables. So one, part of your house is in zone B. All right, so we're making that as a hypothetical theoretical, but it's not so much hypothetical. There are situations like that. You can renovate that home in zone B. You can.
Understood.
You just can't increase the nonconformity, which is in
I
the
am-
interest.
I
of
understand,
trying
It's
to-
just that I do
Yours is now
think
just a value decision based on.
it's a value decision. It's not, I don't think it's really gonna affect me personally that much. But homes, someone might have a home that hasn't been renovated in 30 or 40 years on the street who isn't even aware of this. My guess is there's a few of those people. Because we've spoken to the 25 or so people that have recently done things to their homes. You go down to the other end of the street where there's people who haven't done things. I don't know, does it affect the value of their property if they want to sell it and have someone renovate? I'd say yeah.
Well, those houses actually we looked at, and John, correct me, most of those houses at the western end of your street are already built back. They showed respect for the dunes. They're already built back on the island. And they can get their 33% lot coverage and not go into zone B. So there's
I
still
don't-
oceanfront, but they're back.
Just arguing with you about the value. So you've reduced the value of their property.
I don't see why that.
Because someone who comes in who wants to buy the property is gonna want to build a bigger. house closer
Can
to
I
the-
suggest, Mr. Mayor? So I would disagree with you. I don't know that it's taken down, but we can take that offline.
Okay.
I'd like to talk about more issues around non-conforming questions.
Yeah. Well,
Value-
can I say something, please, real quick? This is
Sure.
This is Denise John, 67 Eugenia. We do have a new survey done, and Zone B goes all the way through our living room up to our kitchen. So that's a big part of the beach side of the house. So, but we do have a new survey, and Zone B or Buffer B does go through almost half of our house.
So we're
Okay.
talking about two things here, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
If you have 5 feet of your lot is in zone B, or your living room is in zone B. In terms of what we're trying to do for renovations, we want that no effect. You're in zone B. Okay? But we don't want it to, we want you to have the ability to rebuild in kind, same footprint, without any effect from this regulation. That's our intent. If your question is a valuation decision, does it affect our value? That's something separate that we're not here to talk about today, I don't believe. It's something we should take back. But if you're talking about what can I do, what's the effect on me if something happens, we're trying to protect all of your rights, whether you're in zone B 10 feet, 50 feet, or not in zone B at all. And let me just come back to one last point, if I may. You asked about where the line is. We just did this for Turtle Beach Lane. I did this for Turtle Beach Lane a week ago, but it got out yesterday or so. We can do that for your whole street and show every lot with some approximation based on the tool. To be within a foot or two is probably pretty good, but if you want to know exactly, then you have to have a survey.
No, I think that would be very helpful.
We could do
I
that.
feel
We could do
bad for
that.
them because their living room is in
Yeah,
zone
we
B.
can do that in the next couple of days.
But I think seeing it and sharing that with all the homeowners who are being impacted by this most directly would be very valuable.
We can do that within the next couple of days.
Yeah,
Thank
look,
You want to show that to the
yeah,
gentleman?
here it is. As a matter of fact,
Thank you.
if I may, I'd like to make the comment. First thing is, I'm Andy Francis, 7 Turtle Beach Lane. I appreciate the fact that you're listening concerning this non-conforming issue. My house is non-conforming. It became very important to me. So, you've done.
But your house is not in zone B.
That's a great document you provided. I can't thank you enough for that. I'm going to share that with all of the other members of the Turtle Beach Association meeting on Thursday. Thank you again. I have a house that could be in zone B, depending on, where the line falls. But if it doesn't change, if we use the 2018 figure forever, then I'm not affected. But let me ask this. You've defined what would happen on the casualty loss, and that's very generous. Okay, what about a decision? Somebody, many of the homes on our street are older. Somebody buys a property and says, I'm going to take this house down and build a new house. And because it is not a casualty loss, it's a decision. If the house they take down is non-conforming, will they be allowed to build back on the same non-conforming footprint? Or will they have to meet the new standards?
It would have to meet the new standard.
And on most of these houses, like I'm looking at 67, for example, if somebody bought 67 and wanted to tear that house down, they could still build the same size house, just a little bit back farther on the lot.
And again, Ms. Francis, the intent, the whole idea here is for future new development, because there are undeveloped beachfront parcels, both commercial and residential, as well as redevelopment of both single-family residential, commercial, and potentially multifamily. Is if there is a complete tear down, we want people, yes, to build back further from the ocean.
Okay.
Full stop.
Thank you for that answer, because in my situation and in many of the older homes on my street, non-conforming, we are greater than 50% of the land or the size of the lot. So if somebody were to rebuild my home, they would have to give up the generator that we added. They would have to make the driveway smaller to become compliant. They could do that. That affects the resale value of my house. Going back to not what the rules are, but value. This ordinance affects the resale value of my home.
I think it's inherently speculative. I like Mr. Warren standing up, but inherently speculative. But again, you could rebuild to your 33% lot coverage, and there are administrative mechanisms to ensure that you can do that and get relaxation on other setbacks if necessary, so as to continue to build the exact same size house that you could wholly apart from the beach overlay district.
That's a casualty loss.
No, that is.
That's you and the next owner.
But again, you're not in the overlay district,
That's
so you
any
can do
owner
whatever
going
you want
forward.
anyway.
That's a change.
Yes,
We
Mr.
never
Warren.
had.
I'm not known for my mathematics, but I'm gonna try it. There was a statement made earlier that most of the people have built their homes on 32.9% of the 33% they can on the lot as it sits. Now, the statement was just made that if you've got a house that you want to tear it down, if lot 67 did it, they said it looks like it's almost halfway through the middle of their house. So how do you take that house and take the square footage of it and move it back far enough from the zone B and still be in your 33% required coverage?
You can do it.
And that is most, I think most lots that the staff has looked at, the planning commission has looked at, correct me if I'm wrong, there is ample room to do that. And there is also, that's the administrative process to allow additional flexibility to ensure that that is still able to be the case.
Without pursuing a variance.
Okay, so I have one more comment.
Well, Mr. Warren, you could bring it down to the studs, right? You can tear it down to the studs and rebuild anywhere you want on that footprint.
Yeah, but if I'm a new buyer, the question about value is something that this doesn't address. Value isn't determined by you other than the people who are the taxing bodies. Value is determined by the market. And people look at that house and say, I don't want to build a house. I don't want to buy a lot or a house that has that kind of restrictions on it. Nothing you say about what they can do will change their mind about whether or not the value. So the taking of the value is something that seriously has to be considered. The other thing I would just say is I've been involved with you all on this a lot, and I've really appreciated the opportunity to discuss it, the way it impacts the resort. And again, clearly I saw an article the other day. Most of this is in respect to, we are the largest parcels down at West Beach and East Beach of what can happen. And I was asked, how do I feel about this? Personally, from the resort standpoint, we really don't have an issue with it for our two largest parcels because any plans we would have, we don't have anything there. We can plan around it. So if somebody decides they want to create a new situation with these two zoning districts or what overlays, at this point, it doesn't seem to impact us. But I would ask you all, why would you, I understand the motivation. You listed all the things that this is going to do environmentally and how everybody is interested and concerned about all these environmental situations. But why would you intentionally impose restrictions on a very small minority, 40 or 50 lots, 40, 50 places, a small minority in an inordinate manner to what everybody else is, when it would seem like you're more fixated on a policy that is simple and cut and dry. We're going to go the same distance all the way along based on the setback, the established setback. Why can't you be adjusting in different sections along the whole island? You'll get to, I hope, your goals. It just won't, it'll take into consideration the impact you're having on different people in different locations. And I know you've thought of it. I know you don't want to do that, but I don't understand, and I'd like to understand that if you could tell me why. And I'll ask Mary, Beth, tell me. You have been the ones explained it to me the best. So.
Well, I don't know that I explain it the best, but so let me look at this from a couple different angles. I hear everyone, and I've enjoyed hearing many perspectives and hearing different slants on things. And so we truly were trying and are trying to look at the island as a whole and to look at the area from the dune landward that is the second line of defense. If there is a storm, if sea level rise continues, it's dunes being primary, that area being secondary. In addition to that, it is habitat. And it is very emblematic of what Kiowa has always been. And much of Eugenia was developed that way. That area was kept, it was there. If you move westward this way, don't you know what this way means? You can see that. So that we were not singling out Eugenia. We were not singling out any part of the beach. We were trying to be consistent across the entire beachfront. We wanted to make sure that anything we did not impact what anybody had today. So by virtue of that, that is where we've landed where we are. It's not perfect. There are 7 of us looking at it, 7 of us thinking about it, at receiving input, but we've received a whole lot more input lately, which is great. So that's how we came to that. It wasn't singling out anybody. We were really trying hard to be uniform. Just to be the devil's advocate a little bit, one of the real benefits if you're a homeowner anywhere along that ocean front is that no one's house is going to stick out any further than it does today. So your view's not going to be impeded. Well, maybe it is, depending on where the house is sited on the lot. But I hear people's concerns. And I think some of those concerns we don't think about, but they're valid everywhere on the island. I mean, there are so many places on the island that the way homes have been built, they are non-conforming or they crossed a setback that no one really paid too much attention to at some point. I mean, we've got a lot of issues, right? The town was established in 94. Anyway, I am wandering. I got the date wrong.
That's okay.
Yeah, but anyway, I hopefully I somewhat.
Right up
answered
there
your
on the
question.
seal, that's it.
Oh, yeah. 88.
Yeah.
88.
But if I can jump in with a comment to that. So one thing that hasn't been discussed much, I don't think, is, and I lived in New Orleans a bunch of years, so Katrina meant something to me. I wasn't there when it happened, but I watched it pretty darn closely because I had a lot of friends there. We need to be sure that we're primarily, one of the prime directives is protecting the dune system, like you were talking about. And it's about protecting property values across the island. And if the dune system, because the structural integrity was impacted, all of our homes are getting flooded. And that's what happened in New Orleans. The storm didn't do the majority of the damage. The flooding from the Mississippi River levee breaching did most of the damage. And so we're trying to be mindful of that too, because that's a high risk for us.
I think we have someone here.
Yes, and I also, I don't know, Meredith, are there questions? Let's turn now maybe to questions online if there are
I
any.
just have one question from Tim Hazel, 283 Governors. He's asking, will language be added to the ordinance to ensure that the 2018 jurisdictional line remains the measurement line regardless of future South Carolina realignment?
The answer is, we don't know yet. And we're trying to ascertain whether there is some certainty to saying using the 2018 line forever. We kind of know where it is now. Question is, you get years down the road and there is really no longer a 2018 line as you can find on the state jurisdictional viewer. And is that the best thing to use, or should you transition to the 2016 jurisdictional line? And the new 2026 jurisdictional line, whenever it is finalized. And if so, what's the best mechanism to do that? Do we simply say we're using the 2018 until there's a new 2016 line and then we'll reevaluate? Or we could have some automatic trigger that says we will use the 2016 line when it is finalized, but to the extent that it moves landward by however amount, if it moves landward 10 feet, there would be a corresponding reduction in the buffer zones.
So let's not.
Yeah, but we're trying to answer Tim's questions.
Yeah.
We haven't solved exactly how we want.
I think that, we've heard the input, we're taking a look at it. No matter what we do, it doesn't bind future councils. They can do something different in the
Yeah, that's
future
right.
and then.
Council from here can change whatever they want to.
But the language.
Line change, y'all are probably gonna want to revisit.
Did you have?
Yes, sir.
I did. My name is Stephanie Robinson. I'm with the South Carolina Coastal Conservation League. I'm really excited that the town of Kiowa is being proactive and looking at a beachfront overlay district to help protect the fragile dune system. I understand that the dunes themselves are already protected under law. I would urge the council and the planning commission not to negate the importance of buffers. I think you've already indicated that you acknowledge that importance. It's not just habitat. It's not just something pretty to look at and somewhere for animals and plants to be. It is a really important resilience, natural infrastructure benefit that is provided. And that if you take that out, by not having things like buffer zones, your primary dunes are extremely fragile and at stake very easily from washover events and storms. And instead of a Myrtle Beach example, I would look at Rodanthe and I would look at even St. Augustine, Florida, where there were not buffers in place. St. Augustine, Florida has the highest dunes on the East Coast. Ponte Vedra Beach didn't have as many buffers in place when lots were developed. Homes are falling into the ocean because of that. Because where those dunes did not have conservation lands behind them, the background, there was no buffer, the supporting maritime forest and other vegetation was not in place, and those dunes were wiped out, and as a result, the homes were wiped out. So again, I think aside from the communal island standpoint, it's something for individual homeowners to see again as a protective benefit that you have and that you want to preserve in perpetuity, not just for yourself, but honestly for protecting your future property values so that you still have property to sell down the line, whether it's you or your heirs. I'll stop there. I know some other folks had things to say, but.
Yes, sir.
Hi, this is Kevin Stokel of 59 and 61B. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Number one, I'm just looking at the chat. Mike McMahon, 41B, talking about the landscaping. I had the same kind of question. But first of all, the fact that there's so many numbers of people there, this is obviously a hot button issue and probably one of the biggest attendance of a workshop that you've had in decades. Is that a correct statement, perhaps?
No, I think the dog leash one probably got.
All right. My point being is you kept saying how this has been in works for a long time. I pay attention to the emails coming from Kiowa Island and really wasn't quite aware of what was going on. I know you had onesies and twosies coming in and talking about the property, but as a bulk, as a number thing, we weren't really quite aware of what was going on until just previous to the last meeting when my wife, Emily, and I heard about this and, you know, we're kind of perplexed. And we started calling at a grassroots level on some of our neighbors and discovered that this could be very detrimental to the values of our properties. I have in our properties, we have two homes. Both are basically non-conforming. Can I landscape anymore? I don't know. But the fact that there's so many people here today, and I don't know the mix of whether they're from the conservation group or if they're property owners. I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, but it dawned on me with an early question. Why have Zone B? It seems like Zone B at this point, because its uniformity, is rather a line being cast from heaven than a line being cast from science. And so at what point should that line be drawn? If we're looking at preserving coastal areas, why is it 100 feet? Why can't it be 300 feet? Why shouldn't it be 600 feet? Why shouldn't it go across Eugenia, where we are, another 700 feet? Because that's where the native properties or native plants lived at one point in time. That's where the native animals lived at one point in time. But they do or don't at the same level today as they did 100 years ago, simply because of properties, not just coastal properties, but the properties across the street. So my question is, why is line B where it is, and why doesn't it go deeper? Because quite frankly, isn't that what we're protecting? Native species, protection from flooding, native animals. It just seems to be, at this point, magic rather than, and quite frankly, at this point, it sounds like it's preordained magic by the decision makers. And it shouldn't be. It should be a line that is either dispensed with, or upon listening to all the people that are affected, the stakeholders, that it's moved in a much more agreeable way to the people so they don't lose value, but yet can continue to hold up the conservation values that Keough holds. That's what I had to say today.
Thank you. Back to questions or comments. Yes. Hi, Bev.
Beverly Fear, I'd like to bring up a couple of questions. First, I'm a neighbor of Andy's. I'm at 10 Turtle Beach Lane. One of the concerns we have on our street, there's 18 houses and 14 of them are in the district because they're within the 150 feet. And four of the houses aren't. So in terms of valuation, do you want to buy a house that's in this district or not? I mean, they're fairly similar footprints. They're built by similar developers at the same time, but yet do you want to buy a house number 12, which is in the district, or number 16, which is not in the district? And that's our concern about valuation. The other concern that we have is insurability. What's going to happen to our insurance rates when we're in an overlay zone? I don't know that question. It's already, well, I don't know. I haven't talked to my insurance agent, and maybe, Joan, you're shaking your head. Maybe
I have.
you have data.
Because I thought it was a legitimate question that came up. So I've been polling, well, asked council to poll their insurance people. I've polled my broker, who polled a bunch of her agents. And at this point, and this isn't a good enough answer for you, but at this point, the existence of a beach overlay district has not impacted insurance rates in the state of South Carolina. Whether it will in the future, but at this point, there's no data to show any impact of the district.
Of this
Now,
district, we're impacted by what's happening in Florida. If they have a hurricane down there, our rates go high. It's very difficult to get insurance as is.
But it's not linked to a BOD.
It's not.
linked.
It
Yeah,
doesn't
it's-
affect your cost of rebuilding. It
It's-
doesn't, I mean,
And so
To any, your hurricane risk. The overlay is just a zoning thing. It doesn't, from an insurer's perspective, and I've looked into this as well, they're looking at things like, are you in a floodplain? Are you near the beach? Or how much are you at risk of hurricanes? Overlay district, it doesn't affect your house isn't more at risk from an insurer's perspective now with an overlay than it was before an overlay. The risk factors aren't what we call, whether you're in an R1 district or an R2 district.
And I think, but
my
I
insurance against climactic events.
I guess we could agree to disagree on that point.
Like I say,
and we won't really know.
other insurance variables, I mean, my insurance agent said that they're anticipating the day where if you don't have storm windows, hurricane rated windows, you're not gonna get your policy renewed. So there's a lot of things going on in insurance.
There's a lot going on. So can you go back to the language about the non-conformance that you're looking at? It was a couple slides ago. And that goes to the certainty, because this is an example of some of the language in the ordinance where there's uncertainty or could be read different ways. So it says existing structures legally permitted, but it doesn't say where. Are those only in zones A and B, or are they in the entire restrained district? It doesn't say. So even if you added clarity, existing structures in buffer zones A and B, simple language like that would at least help us on Turtle Beach Lane. So we would know, okay, right now we're not in Turtle, we're not in zone A or B, so we know we can be assured, but that's not what the language
Just the
says.
third point there, legally non-conforming structure is independent of the beach overlay. So that's just a determination of when a structure was built and any applicable zoning codes that may have come after that deems that structure now non-conforming. So it's not necessarily anything tied to the beach overlay. This was just highlighting.
Right, but that language, existing structures legal or permitted, I think that was in the March 3rd. Draft.
Yeah, that particular statement was in our slide deck from our previous meeting.
Right, but wasn't it in the proposed ordinance? From the March 3rd?
Yes, so
92.
yes.
Well, where does it say that applies to every structure? Not just the ones that are.
A legally non-conforming structure is any structure has been built and there have been new codes adopted that make that structure no longer conforming. So that's just a non-conforming structure just because new development codes or standards have been
Right, I
adopted.
understand that. I'm just saying the language needs to be more.
Yes, we've acknowledged that, yes, that we would, I think add a little bit more clarity to.
I think it's implied that any non-conforming structure on a lot or parcel. It's not in a zoning district, it means on a lot.
If it's not qualifying, it's ubiquitous.
Well, so I'm looking at, this may be totally inappropriate, but I'm looking at the language that Tim Hazel has suggested, and I think, and I don't know what the progress that has been made in any meetings you've had the last couple of days that I haven't been in attendance at, but I believe that language does answer your concerns, Beverly.
Okay.
I know you have a copy of this document, so if you go to.
I'll look at that.
Okay.
But I'm just saying.
I also think Tim is probably still on and maybe he can confirm whether or not I'm right in my reading of his proposal.
Okay, and then, just looking at the Sands Castle, we're in zone A, or it's in buffer zone A, the pool is in zone A and zone B. So does that mean that the pool could not be rebuilt in zone A?
It could be.
It could not be enlarged. It could be built, remodeled, repaired, renovated.
As long as, if you're in zone A or zone B.
Even A.
Yeah.
Even in A, and
Yes.
and the language said that in the March 3rd, right?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's been consistent.
I don't know
is-
whether it said it back at that, yes, that was the intention originally. There's been an issue, that's exactly what we were discussing when we were meeting the other day,
Right.
was to try to make sure that there is clarity around that you can do this.
That would be very helpful. And then the other thing I would ask is, today is the 21st, and I know you have a meeting in early March, that the community have sufficient time to review the new language in the revised draft when it is made available.
I think that's very reasonable.
And I'm asking for the same thing.
Yes, yeah.
And we need the time as well.
Just two quick. One question I have on structure, does that include, I'm a new property owner. A number of properties, including ours, regraded land above 3 feet, trade-off between smaller house and having a lawn for our kids near the pool. Does structure included regraded land and lawn, or is it subject to landscaping that suggests it would need to be ripped out?
The way the ordinance is crafted now, and this isn't specific to the buffer zone application. I want to make sure I understand.
This is in regard to people that have put in in-ground
Exactly.
pools with lawns next to them.
Yeah,
And
so-
regraded that land, because if it's a structure, there's a grandfather. If it's landscaping, it suggests you have to rip all that out. And
What number are you?
we're 53.
Yes, so I'm gonna go in.
There needs to be language that.
The current language as is considers all improved areas in the buffer, so that would include grading, construction, paving, both pervious and impervious hardscapes. Is impervious and hardscapes and any other changes, so that grading would be part of that, yeah.
But not in terms of pulling out what you have now. What is currently there correct me if I'm wrong, but the way the intention was, nothing needs to be ripped out.
It just feels like the two sections, the structure section has protection and the landscaping does not.
Yeah.
Right,
So then-
exactly right. Exactly right. And that was the question I posted in the chat as well. I wanted clarification on that. Mike McMahon, 41B Eugenia. Does this apply, this non-conformance concept apply to landscaping that it's done in buffer zone B? I won't even go down the path of the ridiculous arguments about not the diminishment of value on homes when you're restricting them. That's absurd to even argue the other side of that. But I do want clarification on the landscaping. Is there a similar concept of non-conformance, legally non-conforming? A lot of us have put lawns in and landscaping in that buffer zone B area. We were very careful, by the way, when we built not to touch the dunes, to preserve the dunes. Everyone's focused on the dunes. We built our walkway up and over the dunes, put stairs in to avoid disruption. So we're very respectful of that. And I actually really appreciate all the work around protecting the dunes, not encroaching into people's private property and then setting arbitrary rules. But so if someone could please clarify the nonconformance concept on landscaping, specifically with respect to lawns and plantings that have been done. Thank you.
And if you don't mind, Your Honor, Ann
Oh, I'm
McGowan.
sorry.
It
It's not the same topic.
is on the
Yeah,
same
keep
topic.
going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my concern is around the sandcastle, and we raised this in our conversation earlier last week. You know, the sandcastle expanded the ability to accommodate more of our members by putting astroturf out.
Mhm.
And we did discuss that, and so this goes to the same question of how are you planning to address that? Because I don't think it was resolved.
Yeah, this is just a question for me. We're concerned about the dunes and protecting the dunes. Is the either zone A or zone A plus zone B have a consistent set of feet beyond the dunes inward as you go from Eugenia all the way to Flyway and Surf Song?
So the 2018 jurisdictional line is essentially the crest of the primary dune line. So that is why that was the measurement tool. So that the 50 and the 100 feet are equidistant across the entire island from the top of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then last question is all the different departments in Kiowa, Tanakiewa, are they all supportive of this process? Do you have kind of unanimous consent among Kika and others around doing this, or is there actually
I much mean different departments.
I guess let's just be specific to Kika. Is Kika unanimously in support of this? Or is there a possibility that this would be approved with other governing bodies that are actually not in support of this?
There aren't any other governing bodies. The municipality is the only body that has zoning authority, health, safety, and welfare zoning authority, a police power. Kika did provide a letter to us. There were a couple things that we had to discuss with Kika with regard to what was in that letter, but we've had that conversation. Ms. McGowan is on the Kika board and they had a legitimate question regarding the sandcastle pool, which would be in one of the buffer zones. And so we got clarity that it could be rebuilt, remodeled, restored, etc. Could not be large and expanded. Raised our conversation with them a legitimate question as to the impact on the artificial turf surrounding the pool. And we had that meeting last week. We just haven't, that's kind of the language refinement stuff that we're working through. We just haven't addressed that issue yet.
This wasn't it originally in the rule you guys had proposed, the zoning change. Originally, it had to be a storm, a named storm, or a fire.
That was never,
No.
that was never part of our deliberations.
Okay.
We never mentioned name storms or any.
And whatever was in the
planning
original
commission did.
proposal is irrelevant right now.
Okay, but we haven't seen the new.
Because we're listening.
Can I ask, this is Mike McMahon again. Can I ask the council to address the question specifically on landscaping that I posed? We kind of just jumped past that. the question is in buffer zone B, is there a similar non-conformance kind of grandfathering, if you will, language for things that are planted, lawns and landscaping in buffer zone B?
So the ordinance does not specifically carve out or specifically address landscaping as a separate and apart from structures non-conforming, as it relates to it being non-conforming. It does address in general any hardscapes. So if there is existing hardscapes, then we would treat that as, because landscaping, I think, is a broader brush of what would be considered landscaping. I think from a structural standpoint, there is applicability for hardscape.
Can you define hardscape?
Yeah, I think that's true. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So that helps, but it sounds like we do need as a takeaway some clarity around, I'm talking about grasses and plantings. A lot of us have planted in that area and, beautifully and tended to. So I think we need some clarification. The ordinance does have 25 pages of landscaping detail down to the variegated leaf structures of things. So I think we should clarify this point. Thank you.
So Mr. Was it McMahon? Yeah, I wanted to add the ordinance from a intent standpoint and landscaping and tree preservation does lift a heavy load on and wanting native plants. And so that is something that needs to be, we can have further conversations regarding the ordinance's directions to incorporate native plants. And that's all dovetailing into our existing landscape and tree preservation ordinance. So
That's not answering the question.
But I think the question is it grandfather?
Is it
Yes.
It is landscaping grandfather.
I don't tolerate it in the environment. And not on the native database. Is that grandfathered in or not?
no, I think it's safe to say we're not asking anyone to come and rip
But your
up.
language in your ordinance has an ambiguity that suggests you could go back and say, once approved, hey, this is how it reads. So we need specificity.
There is but there was crystal clarity that you don't need to remove anything. I think your
Not for landscaping, for structures, but for the landscaping section.
there is nothing, you don't have to alter anything. The question that's been posed is if there is a storm event, what is grandfathered in order to be rebuilt? And
I think there's needed clarity.
clarity on
that specific
landscaping that's in the two buffer zones. Yes.
It needs to include remodeling in addition to storms. So if we had to remodel Sandcastle's pool and removed the astroturf, and we put it back in, that
Yes,
needs to be.
yes. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Yes, that's what it has to be in line. Disagree.
Yep.
No, I'm just stretched.
Mark Primar, 81 Dungannon Hall. First of all, thank you for this workshop. I think it's good for everyone to think out loud, even if it's unresolved issues. I think that helps for everyone to simmer on what we hear. I just had a couple of questions. The state has been in the business for, I think, in excess of 30 years of establishing baselines and setback lines. And they have a perspective of the entire coast of varying conditions. Is there any value in necessarily waiting until they hit their refresh button and learning, well, where is the new baseline? If it's exactly where it is right now. It's more about a sense of urgency. Is there a sense of urgency of passage now versus waiting and then activating?
Mark, did you just come a little late to this? I mean, we actually talked about this at some length earlier at the beginning of the meeting. I don't know if you were here then.
I must have been texted. I apologize. So I'm embarrassed to ask the same question then.
Okay, well, so
is there any value in waiting?
We can wait. Either we'll stay where it is or we'll move landward. That change in of itself would not impact the beach overlay district because it's measured off the 2018 line. In addition, the weighting, it's not going to be finalized in any event for another couple of years based on past experience. And there continues to be development and redevelopment during that period of time. So, but we've also been, the staff and fellow council members have been looking at what is the experience with the adjustment of the line elsewhere along the South Carolina coast. It's stayed basically where it is, or in some cases has moved a little bit landward.
Right. I did hear that part, so I'm embarrassed to say I did hear that. So, the one change state made early in the process was largely attributed to Kiowa, which is when the legislation first passed of establishing baselines, it could move seaward. Kiowa is one of the rare beaches that, in fact, majority of it accretes. Once that was discovered, the state in the second wave established, no, it can't, which is a little bizarre, but it was clearly attributed to Kiowa, that they didn't want it to move seaward, even though we had a beach that was propagating. The second question I have is, which is the question I asked in the first session with the Planning Commission, is how did you arrive at 50 feet and 50 feet? What precipitated 50 feet versus 35 or 65 or what? How did you arrive at 50 and 50?
Yeah, so this is predicated on, we looked at the depths of vegetation across the entire ocean front. Where, what I'm using the word is healthy vegetation along the ocean front, those depths, the east end of the island, that is where that 50 and the 250-foot zones come from. Those are married essentially almost the same depth as what I would call a recovery opportunity for the dune fields, where there's not necessarily a single primary dune, but there's several layers of dunes. And so within that 150 feet, you have several 2, 3, 4, 5, even greater sometimes depths of dune field. So that's where that 50 and 100 feet comes from. Looking at the existing conditions on when we compare both west and east ends of the island, that's why those healthy areas of vegetation exist. The other thing that I note, I think, is where the 50 feet is, that's the ability for the two differences in the zones. The first 50 feet, that's being labeled as a no-touch zone. That is the ability to be recovering a little bit more quickly than, we know the existing structures are already in that second zone. Now, there are some properties where buffer zone A impacts the building area, but primarily when we look at that second 50-foot zone is where existing structures are. So there's really a more, not necessarily less of 50 and 50, but more or less the impacts of the standards in those two different zones. Whether or not 50 and 50 is exact science, probably not, but I think that looking at the two material areas of having enough depth of dune field where you're not risking at least one of those primary dunes washing away, now you're risking built environment.
Yeah. If you allow me, I do have one more question.
Certainly.
I can't end a session like this, Joanne, without asking about non-conforming. You know, this is part of my DNA. When you've done the assessment, well, let me step back. One of the 100 series efforts in new ordinances is to test, have you created non-conforming conditions? That's a classic 100 series of planning. So when you've done the assessment, or maybe it's ongoing, what's the differential between conditions now and the increased non-conforming? Would this ordinance create new non-conforming conditions?
Yes,
I think I know the answer to that.
The answer is yes.
To what degree has it increased the non-conforming?
Out of the hundreds of, it's a very small percent of the hundreds of homes along Kiowa's oceanfront. The increase in the nonconformity is very small.
There are almost 600 dwelling units.
20%.
There's almost
It's not
600 dwelling units along the beachfront. And
Including
a very
condos?
small,
Yeah.
a very small fraction of them are impacted.
So private homes, there's what, about 180?
Yeah, about 180.
There's about 40 homes on Eugenia that are all impacted.
They're not all impacted.
30?
Well, and it would.
They're now
I mean,
non-conforming.
Use the term
They'll
impact.
now be non-conforming. That's his question.
Mark, to answer your for full disclosure, Mr. Pramar and I have gone back and forth on non-conforming on many zoning issues that
For years.
that have come up.
I
And
get
I
continuing education credits.
I was doing zoning for almost 15 years in the town before this one. As towns develop, okay, this town was, people were building before 1988. We honeymooned here in 1978. There were some homes here, not a lot. As towns develop and as they become incorporated, they realize how they want their towns to develop. We had in our old town, which was a couple of hundred, it's northeast, it's hundreds of years old. As the town developed, the town councils at the time said, okay, we want to control lot size, for example. The closer you are, we're going to have third of an acre here, quarter of an acre, half an acre. As you get farther out, we'll have larger lots. That created whole masses of non-conforming properties. This is how towns develop. We have seen incursions into houses were built closer to the beachfront than we wish they had been, okay? So this is our way of addressing to prevent further incursions into the beachfront to help protect the island for all of the town residents. Does it create non-conforming? Yes, but that's the way zoning works. And to say we're not going to change zoning because, you know, somebody built a house on 5 acres 30 years ago, we have to make all our lots 5 acres. No, things change over time.
Do you assess the financial impact of those 20 or 25 homes that are now non-conforming out of the 180 oceanfront properties that are single family?
Looked at them, you know, a lot of them, first of all, you can rebuild. Okay, our goal, when we talked in the planning commission, we were very careful, and because we're all property owners, we don't want to hurt anybody. Okay, we would rather all these homes were built farther back on the lot, but they're built already. So if they're built already, they can stay put. If somebody wants to, you know, if your great grandchildren have your property, you know, 50 years from now and want to tear it down and rebuild, almost all these lots, that same size house with 33% lot coverage can be built farther back on the existing lots. If on some lots that is not possible, we recognize that. That's where administrative relief comes in, so that everybody who has a lot can still build a house. And you're still on the ocean front. We just prefer it to be farther back.
Mark, I did want to follow up on the point Joanne made, you raised and Joanne made. We've been looking at this whole, I've been trying to educate myself on the whole issue of nonconformities, bugging Stephanie and John about this and giving them 80-page law review articles on all this stuff and how you treat this stuff. But we're trying to look at what other communities are doing. Around here, Mount Pleasant is a pretty good example of a community that was extraordinarily pro-development for a long period of time, and zoning has done about a 180 more recently. And as a result, they very intentionally created a good chunk of the town of Mount Pleasant is non-conforming structures and uses. But that was all very intentional because of a changed set of community priorities over a period of time from what had previously existed.
But I would suggest we're different than Mount Pleasant. I understand.
It's just,
I understand the philosophy of updating regulations. I think that is a responsible thing to do. All I'm suggesting is one of the tests of consideration is a reasonable assessment to what degree are people impacted by it. So like marshfront setbacks and so forth. Essentially, the marshfront is fully developed right now, right? By individuals. My last count was approaching 400 on the marshfront. Well, it dramatically impacts. My point is, it's not a right, wrong thing. It has impact as part of the consideration. And it may still allow, as you're pointing out, Joanne, you might still proceed. I get that. The assessment is a fair evaluation beyond just the abstract of, I want to be further back from the beach.
I think the planning
That's
commission
all.
kind of systematically did that. Spent a lot of time on that assessment.
So how many properties are non-conforming now that we're conforming?
We didn't look at that number. We looked at making sure that everyone who has a lot can build.
Staff looked at that.
Actually,
Staff
we
has
looked
looked
at that.
at that.
Yeah.
Okay,
What's the
number?
what's the number? Yeah. That's okay. I just was curious.
Out of we're looking at the entire ocean front. I don't want to quote a number. You guys see all these eyes looking at me right now. I would say that because the Eugenia has been discussed, the 40 lots or so that are on Eugenia, majority of those are not existing today. Like, prior to the beach overlay. And the application of the beach overlay would add at least 20 25 plus of those 40 beach overlay. I'm sorry. 40, 30. Let me do this. I'm gonna look at my notes and then I'll come back to you.
That's okay.
But the question
Does it include it includes the condos, it includes everything.
Let me make sure I understand. You're asking about the entire ocean front.
I'm talking global.
Okay,
Yeah.
and I know that Mr.
That's all.
Oleski.
Yeah, I was curious on Eugenia.
Curious. So that'll be fair. We can talk about it.
So if I can, let me just, add a little bit of perspective in this non-conforming issue and valuation discussion. And I'm gonna agree to disagree up front, okay? But I bought a house on Goldeneye, 2018. Had no idea it was non-conforming. It had 42% lot coverage. Our plan was to renovate. So I go to the town, go to the ARB, and you're non-conforming. Every house but 3 on that street and every house but 3 on Avocet is non-conforming. Town council, I'm pointing at the mayor, but not really. The town council changed the regulation somewhere around 2015 or 16 and reduced it down to 33. That thing went to 35 and went to 33 further. So there's a ton, that's a technical term, a ton of houses on Kiowa that are non-conforming that have nothing to do with the beach overlay. And I'll just say, in my experience, my neighbor's experience, it hadn't affected our values at all. Our house has appreciated more than I ever thought it would, and everybody else's has. So there's a bunch of different reasons for non-conforming. But the town did this in the past when they went from unconstrained to now 33%. That created many, many non-conforming houses on the island.
See, I was just curious, how many more are gonna be non-conforming now?
Still working on it.
So that's the question.
So that's the second part of my soliloquy up here is there are 6,400 houses, 6,400 lots on the island.
Well, there are not that many.
There are 4,000.
There are 4,000 front doors. And we're talking about
little
30 or 40 houses. That are, again, they've changed their zoning designation, and I know I'm being very trying to tread carefully here. I don't want to make anybody mad, but we're not trying to take any value away from anybody. We're trying to be consistent across the island. We're trying to protect what is several of the things that define what Kiowa is. And I understand that the folks on Eugenia feel like something's being taken from them. That's absolutely not what we're trying to do. We're trying to, instead of take something from Eugenia, we're trying to preserve something for the entire island. And where you guys fall is unfortunate. And I'll say from my standpoint, and this is just me, and again, the things that we're trying to protect in your yard, if you will, the things that are important to the preservation of the dunes. Dune health, the number one thing for dune health, away from rising tides, is the type of plant life that survives in dune health. Because healthy dunes with good plant life, healthy dunes beget healthy dunes. The wind is restricted to sand deposits where you have trees, where you have strong grasses, where you have deep root systems. They recover. And so that's what we're trying to do, is protect those trees, deep root systems. That's why. That's what makes the dunes healthy, is that plant life. And you can talk about the beauty, the aesthetics, the wildlife corridor, all those things are further benefits. But that native plant life, protecting that dune system, makes dunes grow, which protects everybody's houses.
Across the entire island
And it's
and across the street on Eugenia.
especially on.
So you disagree with all of that?
Isn't that
Well, it's my backyard. You're talking about my backyard. So, that's the backyard of everyone on our street.
I'm actually talking about everybody's backyard, up and down Surf Song, Flyway. Everybody.
Should buffer B be passed? How are the golf courses treated? Can they build a snack shop or observation deck or utility shed if they get an exemption?
So,
We worked very closely with Mr. Pramar, Mr. Warren, excuse me, on the golf courses, and based on feedback, the golf courses can be rebuilt with non-native grasses if in the event that a storm destroys them. No, they're not going to be building snack shacks and
No new structure.
no new structures, but they can rebuild golf courses.
Did have that conversation.
And we did have that conversation.
If we had a structure that was 10 feet tall in zone A, we could build a structure 10 feet tall in zone A, correct?
You could
So-
rebuild.
You don't rebuild.
I mean, B,
Zone
B,
B.
in B.
Yes.
But you don't
already
have
existing,
any.
yeah.
I'm thinking about the restroom area out at number 5 and 6 on the ocean course, because the setback and the line
You
all
can
the way in
rebuild your restroom.
across the golf course
Yes, you can.
likely could be impacted.
Yes,
Just want to make sure we're all on the same page.
we're all on the same page.
You're
We
right. We
don't
talked
want
about it and we are happy with it.
We are happy, yes, and we.
Probably the only
we
person in the room
appreciated
that's
the
happy with
feedback.
everything.
No, and we had good
This,
conversation.
this did come up, at our neighborhood meeting that I attended. There is the wording in there, there's an exemption for the golf course. Really, it's because the golf course uses non-native grass. They use a special salt resistant grass on their fairways. And if, is that correct?
It's hard enough without using the turf. Yeah.
So that's really what the exception for the golf course is, about their landscape.
Why can't there be an exemption for the Eugenia? If Eugenia residents are adversely affected, why can't there be an exemption?
This had to do with landscape. For the golf courses, the exception was the way the landscaping and tree preservation ordinance reads, you have to put in native landscaping. Mr. Warren in one of our meetings was saying, here's the issue with golf courses. So we made an exception for the golf courses. We don't think you want to put, we wouldn't want you.
No,
to
I'm not
put
saying
fair-
the issue's the same. I'm saying you gave them an exemption.
For landscaping, for
Yeah, no, I
landscaping.
understand why. But we're saying our property values are adversely affected. Our properties are adversely affected compared to everyone else. Then why can you not make an exception for the folks on Eugenia?
The purpose of this ordinance is to protect the dunes and the vegetation.
We're not going to solve for the issue of property values. People raise the issue about nonconformities. The facts of the matter is, most of the homes and lots on Kiowa Island are non-conforming structures or sometimes uses, and property values continue to go up, notwithstanding that. Resales continue. Mr. O'Kelly, just before you leave, sir, I just want to, if I could, I invited you at the last council meeting. If you had any specific suggestions.
I asked your council several times to have a meeting with you and never got a response.
No, I asked for, if you have any specific language changes.
But I would like to see what the language is that we heard today. That we thought.
Happy, if you have some specific language change to offer, we're happy to consider that.
I'll send it to your council.
Okay, thank you.
I guess the one thing that we've skipped over, or at least we mentioned it briefly, is when you walk along the beach, as I do often, the dunes along Eugenia are really the most fragile ones. They don't have the depth of the dunes in the rest of the island. And you know what? I hear everything that you guys are saying, and we're gonna take it all back. But, you know, one thing I wanted you to consider is we're actually trying to help you guys. We're trying to help your homes on the beachfront because the dunes are the most fragile on Eugenia. And we're trying to make them stronger, not just for you guys, but for also the guys across the street from Eugenia and for the rest of the island. But with all that being said, I just wanted you to understand, we are hearing you, I am hearing you, but we're not doing this in a vacuum. We're trying to help the island and you guys as well. And we'll get there. I mean, the Conservancy is here. Do you guys, have any follow-up comments, regarding what we're doing or?
Doing our due diligence ourselves. We're having a workshop next week with our board. So we're paying attention to all the feedback that's coming out between the town and Kika.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
It does feel like there's so many vulnerable parts of the dune that are in zone A. And when you look at what's happened, if you look at the last decade, this is just I've been on. No entity actually took any action to try to create vegetation that would stabilize that dune. It seems like if we actually create a concerted effort in zone A, where the bulk of the dune is around vegetation or sand fencing away from the turtles, we have a lot more impact than this arbitrary accretion of zone B. So we're talking about zone B, but there's so many things we can do in zone A. We took the initiative with the Bureau of Coastal Management in South Carolina and the town to protect just our one little barren area that was eroding. If we could get a lot of other members in concert with you in zone A to do it, you'd have a far bigger impact than this arbitrary land grab of zone B. And yet you haven't done anything in the last decade on that zone A parcel that we lived on. And so that's where I just don't, it seems like a huge disconnect.
Well, different council,
but well, no, I mean, also.
I don't know any of the entities.
But that's also a good conversation to have. I don't know, I mean, Ann stepped away with the Kika and the Kika board as well, since Kika actually owns all of the land that is immediately seaward of your property lines, everybody's property lines, with a handful of exceptions across the island. That's not true at the Cape. That's not true of Timbers. It's not true of 6 properties in Eugenia and or Flyway. But other than that, all the property line immediately landward is Kika owned.
I get it, but shouldn't the focus of this then be with that entity that says we have all these barren dunes up and down Kiowa? Let's go make a massive effort on that versus focus our efforts on an extra zone that goes into people's homes. It seems inconsistent because you've said dunes 100 times and we are with you. And I am one of a few homeowners on Eugenia that took the action to do it.
Again, I'm just going to go back to what John said. I want to speak for everybody else. The dunes are probably job one, that maintaining the integrity of the dunes is job one. But there are a lot of other objectives, multiple set of objectives that the overlay is attempting to achieve on behalf of the broader community. So I don't want to kind of get too focused on one aspect of it, but I think it's a fair point to say there are ongoing conversations that all stakeholders on Kiowa should be having about how do we best protect our most critical natural infrastructure, as well as how do we deal with marsh health and everything else, which is a resiliency issue. One reason Stephanie just got back from a resiliency meeting up in Florence. Councilmember Kay has been kind of leading the push and the charge on this issue, looking at marsh management, marsh health. She's been an advocate for a new director of resiliency. We're going to go out with a job opening for that. That will be job one for that person, is to look at a broad range of strategies. This is only the beginning of the kinds of things we need to look at, because we're facing sea level rise. We're facing greater intensity of storms. We've got a better impact. John's working on right now, stormwater management. We have had, just like with our zoning code, our stormwater regulations were antiquated and inadequate to deal with runoff issues in this type of coastal environment.
But your point is well taken.
Yes.
Well, your point,
Yeah.
thank you. I mean,
Yeah.
should we do something to strengthen the dunes? Yeah, I think we should. I think we should.
And if I may, I think we can all relate to the issue around property values. But so much, I look at it from a slightly different perspective than as an individual homeowner. So much of the island's kind of composite value is based on this incredibly unique coastline that we've got. And the fact that we're really fortunate to have a pretty strong dune structure, and all of us benefit tremendously from our ocean front. It's the thing, and from our respect for natural landscaping and the beauty of this island and designing with nature. And that enhances the property value of every single one of us who lives on this island. And this is just a step forward to try to make another consistent path forward. So property values for I mean, every time you make a decision about doing something for your house, when I was making some improvements, in order to do what I wanted, I had to chop off part of my driveway and redo my front porch, and I have to assess the value of that. And maybe do I care about the future value of my house? Well, maybe I do, maybe I don't. But the point is, you have, as a property owner, you make those decisions. Everybody made a decision, those of you who live on Eugenia, to buy along one of the most exquisite pieces of property on this island.
On this coast.
On this coast. But you've got a little bit of risk, your oceanfront. Now, what can we do as a municipality to help protect that oceanfront? That's what we're trying to do.
Risk and responsibility.
Risk and responsibility.
And I don't think that can be said enough, that I appreciate everybody sitting there, that you're looking at the future of Kiowa. So everything that you're doing is to try to project what we want the island to look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now. The houses along Eugenia, they're there, they're fine, they will stay there unless they're wiped out by a storm. So we're not complaining about that, but we just don't want more, bigger, closer to the dunes houses in the future. We just want to take protection that what we've got is fine, but let's not propagate bigger, closer properties to ruin our beach appearance.
It's been a long afternoon, extraordinarily productive from my standpoint. We appreciate everybody taking the time to be here. We know you're very invested in this issue. We're kind of on board everything we've heard, just as we've been doing, and made some course corrections and adjustments. And there is some additional tweaking of language. There's got to be some additional clarity and certainty around some of these issues. So we will, whether working with your council or you want to hear directly, provide input directly to us, as some community members have with specific language changes, we'll come up with hopefully sufficient clarity and certainty around some of these issues, and then we will circulate that back out to the community before we act on it. So you'll have an opportunity to review and provide further input.
Can I add to that final point you made, that the input process doesn't stop today? It's going to continue. There's going to be at least one other planning commission meeting on this. There's going to be at least one other town council meeting on this. There's opportunity to meet individually with the town on this. So please keep providing input as we iterate on this.
All right. Thank you all very much. The workshop is adjourned.